From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans. When farm and ranch businesses develop a business strategy to achieve specific goals like profitability, managers often have to account for risks that come from internal and external uncertainties. Today, I'm glad to be joined again by Dr. Jay Parsons, Director of the Center for Agricultural Profitability here at UNL, to talk about a new article he has co-authored as part of the RightRisk news team. It explores how producers can approach calf retention decisions within a framework of strategic risk management, which helps producers consider what factors influence critical decision-making and strategies for navigating all the risks involved. Jay, thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
Yeah, and in your article, just to start off with, you emphasize the importance of framing decisions like a calf retention decision, which we'll get to, within this strategic risk management framework. So can you talk about what the framework looks like and why it's particularly relevant for decisions like a calf retention one?
Yeah, well, obviously producers make a lot of decisions every day and throughout the year. When we start talking about strategic decisions or some sort of business strategy that they're implementing, that we tend to just think more long-term, but it's not necessarily that. It's really the way I distinguish when we start talking about strategies is that that's something that's going to inform a whole bunch of decisions. So then when we put that in the framework of managing risk, you're thinking about all those risks that can actually influence or derail that strategy along the way. So whether it's calf retention or anything else that you're deciding to do, you're committing some resources to that. There's some things that got to play out over time to reach a particular endpoint that you're looking for. And when we talk about the strategic risk management framework, you're saying, where can this go off the rails, so to speak, and what can I do to actually maybe influence the probability that it does go off the rails, or maybe the impact if that happens. So there's a number of different things depending on the context, and I just used the example of the calf retention decision, which a lot of people are talking about right now.
Yeah, so what are some key factors that should be weighed in that specific decision, whether to retain or sell calves, and then how would those then be examples or tie into the broader risks faced by their operations?
Yeah, so if you think about retaining calves, which a lot of people are asking about because we have really high calf prices, and this year in particular compared to previous years, the cost of feed has gone down quite a bit, both with the on the grain side with that aspect, but then certainly on the forage side where we have $100 hay now, and it wasn't that long ago we were looking at $250 hay across most of the state. So a natural tendency is to say, hey, feed's cheaper, calves are worth more. Maybe I should retain them. But that involves a lot of commitment of resources. And a big one that we think about, but maybe not in a complete sense, is just the commitment to hang on to the calves, the money invested in the calves, because a lot of calves could be sold for high prices right now. Some of our historical highs, if you look at them. And so you're committing that cash to those calves to actually retain them and put more weight on them. So that's one thing to just realize. That can affect cash flow, which can have a lot of other implications to your business, depending on what other needs you have for cash through time, your relationship with your banker, how sensitive you are to the interest rate fluctuations that we're seeing, and so on and so forth. So all of those weigh into that strategy and how that's actually going to work, depending upon the time frame that you're actually looking at. And of course, I mentioned the resources, the feed resources, but then there's also people's time. There's a lot of things to consider there over that potential retention period.
And when you talk about like the feed costs, calf prices, and current projected market conditions, all of that, are there specific tools producers can use to analyze those trends as part of their risk management strategy?
There are, and one of the ones I outline in the article is just to make sure that you look at your break-even price. A lot of times we give words to stuff, but producers or whoever, they kind of take shortcuts. And when I looked at the calf retention decision just a little bit ago, I took a shortcut, right? I just said, what are current calf prices and what is the feed cost attached to that? But it's not necessarily comparing the feed cost of gain, so to speak, feed costs might come into play in current calf markets. What I alluded to with the incoming value of the calf is one thing that you got to make sure that you account for, because that is a true cost. And the fact that you could sell it right now for a very high price dries up that needs to be totaled in there along with your feed costs and everything else that goes in over that retention period to get a total cost number, which would then be divided by the total weights to get an actual break-even price that you need in that ending value of the calf. Break-even per pound or per hundredweight, depending on your preference. So that's one of the tools to make sure you get to that break-even and make sure you're actually making a comparison to the market price that you're going to see at the end. There is an alternative to that. That's called the value of gain calculation, and I've gone into that with some other articles that I've written over time. But it's a similar idea. It's just making sure you're comparing apples to apples. But that's going to compare to the cost of gain, which is the pounds you put on over that period. And value of gain simply takes that beginning value of the animal and subtracts it from your projected ending value to get a total value gain. And then you would divide that by the total cost. And if you did it, you could do it on a per head basis, but a lot of people do that on a per pound basis where they look at the pounds of gain during the retention period. So it's just making sure you're comparing apples to apples is a key part of that. And then from a strategic risk management standpoint, we primarily focus on that ending market and stuff like that. But you think about that, the actual performance of the calves in there, and then anything else that might come into play that would affect that performance or that cost associated with producing that weight gain.
Yeah, could you give some more examples of operational challenges versus like the financial and market factors that are weighing in, operational challenges that producers should consider when deciding on this example to retain calves?
Yeah, so operational deals more day-to-day type of stuff. So you just think about an employee calling in sick, and you got to backfill that time, or a machine breaking down and you got to fix it, that kind of stuff. From a more strategic standpoint and a longer term thing, there's those cascading effects, or however you want to look at them, in terms of those resources, say the money being tied up and what else that might affect on the operation, and the lingering effects of not having that cash flow where you want it to be, and not being able to do something else on your operation. But then also, if you think getting away not necessarily from the calf retention decision, but any decision where you're committing resources, sometimes that involves investment in equipment. Sometimes it involves investment in somebody's time. And so there becomes a period of times where you aren't able to do something else. And if that something lucrative comes up, you're not able to take advantage of it, those types of things. So there's a lot of different connections there for people to think about from a strategic standpoint. Doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to do it. It just means you need to think about that from an uncertainty standpoint.
And do you have any advice then for producers who might be struggling to balance the potential risks and rewards of a decision like, again, retaining calves, especially in a volatile market environment? Just general risk management stuff plays into it, but always think about it in terms of the different impacts on the operation as a whole and some of those different alternatives that you might bring into play. So a simple example might be when we look at the feed costs, right? So we say, all right, so I got this feed sitting around, the market price is X, that I could have that. Well, I'm going to go ahead and feed that to my calves, okay? And so let's just say I make a 3-month commitment to feed these calves and take them to a heavier weight, and then suddenly somebody walks on to, says, hey, I'm going to pay you, $150 a ton for that hay that you thought was only worth $100, right? Well, that's a great opportunity, right? You're going to get a much higher price than you anticipated the hay was worth, but now you've committed it to your feeding operation. So when you think through that from a strategy standpoint, say, okay, so what if something like that happened? What are some of my alternatives for feed resources? And it could happen, maybe somebody else comes in and says, hey, I got some feed over here. And you're like, wow, I didn't know about that when I took this on, but that's a much cheaper feed resource. So I'm going to take advantage of that and move this other resource to another spot. So it's thinking about those other opportunities that could come up, both from a positive standpoint and a negative standpoint. Those things, those uncertainties that can impact you. What are the other things that you could do to still implement that strategy in a positive way and come up with a positive outcome without affecting too much on your other parts of your operation? And are there like tangible steps that somebody can take to think within this framework, or just think more strategically when they're sitting, whether that's just like taking a certain amount of time at a certain point in the year to sit down and really think about this in a different way than they have? Is there any advice in that realm just to get people thinking more strategically?
Yeah, well, one of the things I always say, start with the end in mind, and that's probably the first step with the strategy. I say, how's the strategy play out? Where's the stopping point where I can maybe switch a strategy, or in the case of a calf retention decision or some other enterprise, when does that enterprise period end, right? So think of planting a crop or something like that. When is the crop going to be harvested? And then I can decide what to do. So it's always thinking in terms of those time frames and those big decision points. And sometimes there's points along the way, and crop producers do this all the time when they're going to put in they're going to do, say, scouting a field, and they might apply some herbicide or some sort of pesticide or something like that if certain thresholds are there. So what are those big decision points along the way that you are going to be passing through on the way to that endpoint? But first of all, you got to identify what that endpoint looks like and what success looks like at the end of the day.
Well, great stuff from Dr. Jay Parsons. He's a professor and farm and ranch management specialist here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and director of our Center for Agricultural Profitability. You can find more about what we've been discussing on this episode in his latest article that he's co-authored as part of the RightRisk news team that is linked to in the podcast notes wherever you're listening and on our center's website at cap.unl.edu. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Thanks, Ryan.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.